Hey, Nathan, can you believe we've been doing this 15 years now?
15 years of TFL, at least TFL car.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And in this podcast/video, we're going to be talking about the best cars we've driven over those 15 years.
Now, I want to put a little caveat on that, which is there are cars that stand out because they were something special to us or something special to the audience or first time driving a car of that caliber. And you'll understand when you see this list, because otherwise it'd be like every year would be like Corvette and BMWs or whatever. So, yeah, we have a bit of a mixed up list here.
Yeah, and I just want to do a little shout out to all of our fans who watch this as a video and to all of our fans who listen to this as a podcast. Now, keep in mind, like last week, we did an auto show podcast where we did a walk around of the Chicago Auto Show, and a lot of the podcast fans were unhappy because obviously they couldn't see it.
Yeah, good point.
And the exact opposite happens when we do one where we're in the studio like we are today, and there isn't a lot of like visual interest where we're not walking around cars. So I would suggest to you guys, if you're our fans, you can go to alltfl.com and you will either click on the video version or listen to the podcast. So if you really don't like that we're at an auto show walking around and you can't see what we're pointing at, just watch the video.
Yep, that's a good point. Now, speaking of videos, almost everything here on this list, we've done a video on or videos on, and so you'll be able to click around and find them. The thing about going to alltfl.com is only recent videos are up there and recent stories. So a lot of the ones we're going to be mentioning go all the way back to 2009.
Speaking of that, let's start with 2009.
Yep. And Roman and I, when we first got together and started doing videos, one of the earliest videos we did was a Mustang versus a Camaro. Unfortunately, we had a Mustang GT convertible versus a Camaro RS, and it was just like, it wasn't the best pairing, but it was the best we could do at the time. That was a very different TFL back then. But the car that really stood out to me was the Camaro RS, because at the time, 2009, this was a very new car, and it pointed a new direction for Chevrolet, and I think for us as well. So that's one of the reasons it's on this list.
Yeah, I love that car. The very first car, Nathan, that we got as a test car, long before we actually were doing videos, when this was just a blog, get this, was a Chrysler Sebring. You remember the Chrysler Sebring?
Unfortunately, I do. And
it had cooled cup holders. And maybe they were chilled and heated. I forget.
Ooh.
It was crazy.
I forgot that had cooled cup holders.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, that was like a German thing too. Like there were some German cars that. Well, that makes sense because back then it was Daimler Chrysler.
And I figured out the reason we had that Sebring was Paul, who was the fleet manager at the time, would never give you like the top car. He wanted to make sure that you didn't.
That you could deliver on putting together something that would be a return on his investment.
Yeah, or you didn't crash it into a tree at excessive speeds. Or take it off-road when you shouldn't.
Well, God, how did I ever get other cars?
So let's go back to the Camaro, though.
Yeah, the Camaro, I mean, that was a V6, and it was the one that we were given was the RS. So it was like a mid-level. It was not the best car in the world, but man, at the time, we drove the hell out of it. I took it to the track. That was right when the whatchamacallit track opened up down east.
High Plains.
High Plains, thank you. I brought it over there. I did everything I could with it. And the irony of it wasn't even the high-powered car, which later on we got really high-powered Camaros. I think this was Chevrolet's way of saying, yeah, let's give them this one to begin with. But that was really a way of kickstarting this little video production company.
It also kind of started something that became kind of a signature of ours, not because we wanted to do it, but because we had to do it, and that was mashup reviews.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people think we're two kind of goofy guys who don't understand that a convertible Mustang doesn't compete with a...
Well, especially V8 versus V6,
Yeah,
right?
we get that. We understand that 8 versus 8. But the way that the press vehicles work is that they don't have competing cars most of the time, if not all the time, dare I say, in the press fleet. So you kind of get what you get, and you make the most of it.
Back then, that was very true. It's not as difficult nowadays, thanks to the fact that the fleets of here have grown significantly. And with the hard work of Zach, the producer, and whatnot, we are able to get cars that compete far more often than not. But back in the day, man, we couldn't do it.
No, it was almost impossible to get cars. In fact, I think we did some damage to our Porsche relationship when we compared a 911. Do you remember what we compared it to?
Was it Hyundai?
No, keep going.
I'm trying to remember what we did.
We were.
Was it the yellow Porsche?
Yeah, it was the
that's
yellow
on this
Porsche.
list.
Yeah,
that's actually.
We were
one of the-
hopped up on Top Gear, and so we compared it to something.
Oh my God!
You remember? Now you remember?
Yeah, a van.
We compared it to a van.
Oh wow! Yeah, wow! I don't even remember why we did that.
Like
that
turning
was-
circle. It was something like a turning circle.
Well, that Porsche is going to come up in a second with some other, but because that was a good year for Porsche for us, and then a bad year as well.
well, we compared it to a van. I
think they were really ticked at us for a while, and back then it was really hard to get Porsches.
It still is.
Still is.
Yeah.
Hey, podcast listeners and TFL Talk viewers, I wanted to take a minute to talk to you about a quick and simple way to sell your car or truck with the help of our new partner, HighRoad. With HighRoad's online portal, you enter your vehicle's VIN number or plate, mileage, and zip code, and you'll get competing offers from several qualified dealers in your area within seconds. You pick the best deal offered and follow through with the dealer to sell your car. No more managing scammy emails from buyers on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. No more time wasted on no-show buyers. No bait and switch with a "will you take a check" excuse from sketchy buyers. Now keep in mind, these offers will be for trade-in values of your vehicle. If you want to go through the hassle of getting more for your car, that's up to you. But if you want to sell your car hassle-free and fast, go to tflcar.com and click Sell Your Car in the navigation menu. Or click on the HighRoad ad at the bottom of the website if you're on mobile, or click on the column if you're on a desktop. HighRoad makes it easy, and we like easy. But yeah, that's a whole different thing. Okay, let's go into 2010.
Okay.
That's when we had the Chrysler 300C SRT8. That was the very first version of that. And I recall both of us had a great time with the car, and we took it up to Wild Bill's grave.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. The SRT8 Chrysler 300 is a special car. It's a car that is about as American as you could be, right? Built in Detroit. It has a lot of presence. And of
Big
course,
honkin' V8.
Big honkin' Hemi V8. Over the years, as these cars have become cheaper, we've kind of gone back and bought some of them.
Yep.
That's how we know what cars to buy, because we knew what cars we loved back in the day. The problem with that car is it just got the wheels driven off of it. You'd be very hard pressed to find a 300C SRT8 that doesn't have at least 150 miles. And those, dude, are hard miles. People drove.
Yeah, exactly.
People
They
drive them
drove
hard.
the crap out of them, and they just beat up on those cars. And in many cases, they could take it. Actually, Brendan and I did a video on one of these cars on TFL Classics, and that poor thing was beat to hell.
Well, not just that, but not only were they beat to death, but they were smoked and they were vaped, and God knows what else happened in those cars.
Well, in many cars that happens too, but it seems like the 300C was just sort of a glutton for punishment, and boy, they were good cars. I don't think that some of them have survived because of some of their owners.
So we should talk about what was under the hood, right? So there was
that's exactly it. Giant Hemi.
Yeah, there was a regular 300, which was, of course, the luxury kind of boulevard cruiser. And then because I think Ralph Gilles actually, this may have been.
I think that's one of Ralph's, yeah.
Yeah, and because of him and because of all the work he was doing with the SRT, they decided to put a much bigger Hemi, 480 horsepower, if I recall.
It's something around that, yeah. But bear in mind that we're also talking about a
pre-Hellcat.
Yeah, pre-Hellcat, and just a lethargic engine that was just like happy to cruise around all day long at like 1,700 RPM. But if you put your foot into it, it could absolutely go crazy.
I'm going to Google it now.
While you're Googling it.
I need to know how many horsepower that thing had.
Now, a couple things that happened. Eventually, and I only put the 300C SRT on this list once, and there really were a few different models that were out there. And Roman and I also went to the event at a track where, was it Button Willow or something like that? Where
Willow in California,
That was it, Willow. And that was the updated one, which...
470. I was only off by 10.
Yeah, that's not bad.
That's not bad.
Oh.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that car was muscular. It was fairly comfortable. It had a nice interior, even the first generation. I thought it was a hell of a car. And it was also a major bargain if you looked at a lot of the German and Japanese competitors back then, what they offered for the money. This thing gave you crazy power and, a nice, comfortable environment. Unfortunately, quality wasn't quite up there with
Yeah, that
especially
was
on
what let it
Lexus.
down. So it had that 6.4 liter Hemi, right? The big old Hemi.
Big old Hemi.
Yeah, the problem with it was that the interior was very much parts bin, and so they gave it some like Alcantara, I think, seats.
Yeah, well, the headliner was the seats were nice leather.
But all the switchgear was
it was still pretty cheap.
Was still like rent a car, which those were, by the way.
But yeah.
And so you can dress up a racehorse, but it's never going to be a Derby contender because it doesn't have. Even though I shouldn't say that, right? I mean, the bones of that thing were the old E-Class that eventually evolved into the Hellcat. So I guess it maybe did have the bones of a very powerful muscle car.
And we will be talking about these bones a little bit later. The next one on our list, this is a car that I think really changed a little bit of TFL. I truly believe it. And that was a 2011 Audi R8. The one we had was the V8 with the manual transmission. It was white.
Yes, I remember.
And it was beautiful. But the thing about it was, I think, the first car that both Roman and I were almost speechless on. It was so attractive. It was relatively comfortable for a supercar. One of the best gearboxes ever. I mean, I loved shifting the thing. It was an actual bolt action feeling to shifting gears. Drove amazingly. We did as many videos as we possibly could with it. And we adored it. We really, truly adored that car. But the thing that was important for the organization is that with TFL, we now were in the supercar league driving a vehicle that was just beyond our expectations.
Yeah, two thoughts I have about that car. First, you remember the one that we had, maybe it was the next generation, where the suspension completely, we took it out to Rabbit Mountain and we were doing some like acceleration tests, I think. Drag racing. Anyway, and the suspension, it was a silver one, and the suspension completely collapsed on it because I think Motor Trend had it before us, and they took it on the track.
Oh no, that wasn't an R8, that was an S8, or that was the big sedan, and that thing had crushed exhaust on it, and it had like curved wheels. That thing was beat to hell, but that was the big sedan. Yeah. This is the R8. This is the two-door supercar.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Yeah.
But that was around the same time that we had.
So this one, the R8, we took to the Stanley.
Yes, we did.
Remember?
We took it up through the hills. We took it. We took it all over this area locally. We took it to Stanley,
and we also had the Gallardo engine V10 that they put.
That was later on. That was about 2 years later that we had that one. I actually preferred the V8. I thought it was easier to drive.
I've been looking at those to purchase as well.
Yeah,
the convertibles are actually cheaper than the coupes,
which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, to be honest with you. I always thought convertibles would be worth more.
They're like $60K now, so you can get one of those. But the problem is they look pretty dated. Like there's a little tiny screen, and it's just starting to look a little dated for that first generation of R8. But I do love that car. I agree. I would go. I don't think I needed the Lamborghini engine. It doesn't give you much more power, if I recall. It just gives you much more kind of prestige because now you can say
it was louder. That was for sure, and it was quicker. But it was. But I felt like the V8 was just happier to be thrown around corners. Maybe it was a little lighter on its toes. And especially with that manual transmission, it was just so sweet. It was the sweet spot of supercars. And once again, you and I think, were starstruck with what was an excellent car. And that leads to the next car, which may be one of the best sports cars ever, despite the fact that we probably shouldn't have compared it to a van. And that was the 2012 Porsche 911. And at that same time, that same year, we also had the Cayman R, which was a crazy car, and the Cayenne. And that was the first Cayenne that I had actually driven personally. It
was a GTS, I recall.
Yeah, and it was crazy good. It really redefined everything that we knew about crossovers and SUVs. The Cayman R, that thing was so lightweight, no stereo. I believe there was a air conditioning delete that they decided to leave, thank God. It even didn't have door handles. It had inside these little flaps.
I remember, they still do
fabric.
That.
Yeah.
They do like these little like leather poles. Instead of door handles.
Those grams are going to save you. Yeah. But that's the whole point of the car. It's a super leggera car, right?
So I remember falling in love with that 911. It was very yellow.
Very yellow.
And then remember, we were looking for a place where we could actually do some like acceleration run safely. And we came upon a parking lot in the middle of like Commerce City in Denver.
At the racetrack, at the dog racetrack.
At the dog racetrack or wherever that was.
Oh, yeah.
That didn't work very well because the problem with parking lots is even though they feel like they're pretty straight, when you go across them in a very kind of quick manner, you'll quickly find out that they're very undulating.
Well, they're not built for high speed.
No, they're not.
It's not like a runway or a
No,
racetrack.
exactly.
Yeah. And back then we were still figuring ourselves out, and we used that place a couple times, but for the most part, we were just kind of figuring out what we needed to do and how we should move on. But the important thing is that 911 was, by definition, a proper sports car, and as good as the Audi R8 was, that Porsche was just as good. But the real difference to me was I think that the curb appeal of the Audi R8 was a little nicer back then. But once again, we had a bunch of Porsches in 2012, and that was, yeah, I can't believe we did a van. God, why did
It was
we?
a red Nissan NV, if I remember right.
Yeah, God, that Nissan Envy. So we had that van a lot. We'd used it a lot for several different things, but that was
I think we were trying to be Top Gear, and we tried to come up with something clever.
something unique
and
and
it
funny.
wasn't Top Gear or clever. It was
No, it
just
was
silly.
terrible.
Yeah, it was just terrible.
So let's move on. Because
Sorry, Porsche.
yeah, sorry about that. We've learned a lot since then. That was a while ago.
They all can't start out being Top Gear.
No, we can't all be Clarkson. So 2013. Now this is an interesting year because Ford had promised for years to bring out a hot hatch, and we knew the Europeans had it, and we had been jonesing for it, and we actually talked to a Ford exec the year before who said, yeah, we're going to get one, and we didn't really believe him. And then the Ford Focus ST showed up. And what a baller car that was, man. That thing was insane. Just crazy amounts of torque for a small four-cylinder hyper turbo engine. And it was remarkably fast. It was bright yellow. We had a really good time making some videos with it. It handled wonderfully. I know from many of you guys, actually, that it wasn't the most reliable car on the planet. I still see a couple of them here and there around, but I certainly see a lot more GTIs. The GTI is a lot more buttoned down than that one, let's face it. But it was a great car. And at that same time was the first time that you and I drove the Tesla Model S.
Yeah, that was because of Dan Buxbaum. He lent it to us. That was quite the game changer. I remember getting into that thing, thinking to myself, wow, this is something that I've never experienced before. This is something that is completely different. It was, even back then, it was crazy quick.
It was insanely fast. And what happened was earlier, and I didn't include it on this list because it was crap. We drove, one of the very first cars that he and I drove together and did a video on was the Roadster, the Tesla Roadster. And we actually took that up and over the Continental Divide and on summer tires. There was snow on the ground. And that car was worth, what, $150,000?
Yeah, exactly. And there was the problem Tesla had, and it's the same problem that Lucid has right now, is when they came out of the box, and I think this is why it took them so long to actually get rolling, because the bones of the vehicle were always good, right? The technology was good. Mm-hmm. The build quality, of course, wasn't great, but the design was good. The utility was good. But they always felt, at least to me in those early days, like unobtainium, like they were so expensive. And I know the Roadster was 150, but that Model S was also over 100 back then.
Yep.
And then the Model X came along, and that was also over 100. And so it felt like Tesla started at the wrong end of the spectrum. And I feel like Lucid is also doing the same thing.
There are a lot of startups who are doing that. They're bringing out the most expensive version first. And then they're like, well, then we'll tempt the people who actually really need this vehicle later. And I think it's a terrible idea. I think you should go the other direction, personally.
Yeah,
now, granted, Tesla's done well, but I think their model is unique, and I don't think that
they
other
were
people
first.
Exactly, and I don't think other people following it will work as well.
Even Rivian, same problem. And once you set the brand's kind of reputation as being unobtainium, a lot of people won't even consider it, right?
Exactly.
It just becomes like, oh, it's a good car, but it doesn't mean anything to me because I'll never be able to own it because the car costs $90,000.
Precisely. So after we drove the Roadster, and we were both like, some of it's kind of cool, but a lot of it was not great. Then a couple of years later, we drive this Tesla Model S, and it just blew our minds. But once again, way out there. But something came along shortly thereafter, and this is a very interesting time because this was right when a lot of social media was really starting to kick into high gear, 2014, in terms of people going out there and introducing photos, spy photos and everything, and putting them right online. And something happened at Jeep because somebody walked around inside the plant and took a picture of the brand new Cherokee well before it was supposed to come out, and it wasn't a very complimentary or flattering
Yeah, because
picture.
it had that, which is now commonplace, but back then was very unusual design, where the headlights were kind of looked like giant fog lights, and the turn signals or the little
And the driving lights, yeah.
were actually above the headlights. So you were like forever. The turn signals and the driving lights were below the headlights. Now it's flipped around.
It looked, and that particular, I think it was white or silver or something. It just didn't look great. And it was a very uncomplimentary picture, and it hit the internet. So immediately, the backlash was huge. So Jeep had an event, and you and I went. And shortly thereafter, we got our hands on a 2014 Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk. And that was a remarkably good off-road capable crossover. At the time, it was one of the most capable off-road vehicles in its class. Only recently being usurped by the Ford Bronco Sport, their top trail version of that vehicle. But for years, it was just like, if you wanted a crossover, basically a car, that could actually do some real off-road, not super serious, but pretty serious off-roading, that was the vehicle to get. And at the same time, I had a little personal favorite vehicle that came along. I don't know what it was about the design of this thing, but I loved the Chevy Sonic when it came out.
I remember
with those
we had
angry little headlights.
Remember we had the turbo?
Yeah, there was the RS Turbo.
Yeah.
I thought that thing was so much fun and such a screaming deal for what it was. I know that it had reliability issues, no surprise there, but it was a hoot to
I think
drive.
it was a Korean car, actually.
Yeah, it was Korean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they built in
It's
Korea.
this same thing goes for current Chevy Trax. That's also Korean. But still a lot of fun to drive, and I really enjoyed it. That's a personal thing. But then we move on to 2015. Now, we had already driven a Nissan GTR prior to that, about 2 years prior. But this was when the GTR Nismo came out, and we got our hands on that. And then shortly thereafter, we drove the Lexus RCF. Both those vehicles, I think, had balance in terms of one is super high-powered luxury, one is just an ultimate supercar. Both those vehicles were just incredible at that time. And I'm going to throw one more in there, too, because that was around the same time that we started driving Hellcats.
Yeah, that was. I remember we went to the Portland racetrack, and we were doing 0 to 60s, and even back then we couldn't reach what the published numbers were.
Not even close.
We had one of the chief engineers try to hit the number, and he couldn't do it because that car just couldn't hook up because it was so undertired, right?
Yeah, back then especially. When
they didn't have the wide body yet.
Nope, they didn't, which is on this list as well. What was really funny was that at the time, we're still pretty close with people over at our Stellantis, but back then we knew a bunch of the Dodge guys, and they brought us in right before the event, and they had like Red Bull and donuts from Voodoo Donuts and all these other things. Basically, they wanted us to have caffeine and sugar in our systems before driving a vehicle that had over 700 horsepower at a racetrack, which is a perfect thing to do with a bunch of journalists. We even got a chance to take it around the track and drive with professional drivers sitting on our right. And that went really well. We didn't crash, at least we didn't, knock on wood.
Somebody crashed, if I remember.
Yeah,
right.
there was a few people put them into the wall. But it was a
We shall
huge
remain
thing.
nameless
I'm not going to.
because we don't want our names coming out.
Yeah, we don't know. Yeah. We're going to
What
be
comes
nice.
around goes around.
Exactly. I try to be nice. I think it was an important time because at that point, we had never driven a vehicle with that much power.
Yeah.
And the fact that this is an all-American car with a big old American V8, this just blew us away. The numbers that they were coming up with. I kept thinking it was a misprint when we first got the information on it, and that really led the way for many years of this whole Hellcat thing, which is now officially going away.
Before we get to the next one, can I do a rant?
Yes,
I've done a rant
please.
in a while.
Yeah, hit it.
All right, so we've been driving a lot of different cars recently, and they've had some interesting features, but more importantly, they've had some interesting missing features, especially in expensive cars. So my question is, why do automakers scrimp on stuff that somehow you touch? I understand when you would scrimp on stuff that's maybe like hidden and you don't see it, like maybe Sirius XM or something where you could probably live without it. But the stuff you touch in the car, the stuff that makes the first impression, or truck, that I don't get. And I'll give you a couple examples. Do you remember when we had that Ford F-250 with the Godzilla?
You're going to talk about the steering wheel.
Oh yeah, the plastic steering wheel, and I think that was an XLT.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with you. That thing felt so chintzy and So it actually felt like something out of the 70s or something, a really hard Bakelite or something. It was weird.
Yeah, it was this crappy plastic. We actually went to the trouble of replacing that steering wheel because I hated it so much. And I would eagerly pay $1,000 more to have a nice leather-bound steering wheel, even on a basic car, because that's the thing I'm touching all the time.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, having a nice surfaces to touch when you're touching them all the time, like the steering wheel, really does make a difference.
Another one that is huge to me because I have a bad back, and I think a lot of people have back issues. Why do they skimp on lumbar? It's such a you don't have to have the inflating pillows. You know, all it takes is just a little, bar that pushes. But it seems like that's the one thing that many manufacturers decide that people don't need. I'll give you an example. We have a Ineos Grenadier, which we paid $80,000 for. It has no lumbar. Who for an overlander, Nathan? Who thought that was a good idea?
I think the Europeans take a rugby ball and shove it behind their back, and that's how they get the
It
lumbar.
might be true.
Yeah, I think that's what they do, right? And you call it rugby, right?
I'll keep going. I got more.
No, please hit it.
All right. How about when they have power seats on the driver's side, but this is very common, manual seats on the passenger side?
Yeah, my car has that.
Yeah. Why? It just feels like, you know what it feels like? It feels very cheap and very cost cutting. And you just say to your lovely wife, honey, you sit there while I drive, and I will, move my seats up and down electrically with a touch of a button while you're struggling to, reach behind and do the recline, and then, reach underneath and do the. It just seems so asinine. Just if you're going to spend the money on a power seat, do them on both sides.
All of these things. Do you have any more? Because I can answer most of these.
Okay,
It's pretty
keep going.
simple. Okay.
These are all tactile things, right?
Yes,
These are
they're
things where you
tactile,
touch.
but they're also. You're talking about features. While I agree with you with many of these, especially being married and having my wife complain endlessly when she goes into my car and talks about having to adjust the seat.
I'll give you the most classic one.
Okay,
Keep
go
going.
ahead.
So I was just in Chicago, and I got into the new Model 3, the refreshed, I guess, internal code is Highland, right?
These are the Highland. Okay.
Yeah. You know what the most tactile thing they're missing? A turn signal stock and a wiper stock. There's just something so satisfying about, flipping a stock and then the car goes tick, 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 right? As opposed to pushing a button on the steering wheel. It's so freaking lame.
I agree with you. Okay, so I have a simple answer for most of these, and that is cost.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you and I both agree that it'd be pennies for them to include these things. However, to somebody who's pushing pencils across the table, trying to find ways of getting that car to come in at a lower price for the manufacturer, the easiest thing to do is say, well, let's make A, the passenger suffer, B, let's take things away that we can replace with simple tech, and C, why not just put a cheap plastic steering wheel in there for those people who aren't willing to pay extra for the, lariat or whatever. And that's the bottom line. It's all about money. That's the only reason why they're doing it. I agree with you that it makes people uncomfortable, which is why I like certain automakers that give you a lot of that for the money, and I reward them by saying that out loud. Hey, this is a car that gives you a lot for the money, including, power seats or a really nice steering wheel or something like that, when other vehicles coming in at the same price don't do the same thing.
And here's the other thing that I've been listening to this podcast called CarPro. It's really interesting. It's a call-in show, right? And people call in and they ask for car buying advice. Mm-hmm. And Nathan, I'll be damned if not one of these people actually thinks they're going to own a car less than 2,000 years, right? Because I don't think you can even get a longer than 10-year warranty on a vehicle. Like every one of these people, the one thing that they really want is, I want the car to last at least 200,000 miles.
Ooh.
And first of all, I'd get bored much sooner than, you know what I mean? I mean, you're asking for these things that in your head you think are something that is going to save you money over the long point, but who keeps their car for 200,000 miles? And I know you people will be out there. There's always somebody, I have a 500,000 mile F-150. Well, good for you, but the majority of people, first of all, can't get a loan for that long.
Yeah.
And here's what happens, okay? Here's what ends up happening. And this happens to all cars, even Toyotas, right? Mm-hmm. the car depreciates so much,
Yes.
right? That most cars after 7 years have lost at least half their value, if not more.
In many cases.
If not more, right?
Right.
But within 10 years, the car is so depreciated that even if it's reliable, a small repair will cost you more than actual lease on a new car.
Yes.
You see the problem. Once upon a time, when the repairs were hard and cars, people didn't swap out cars. Of course, the logic was, I want to make this. I remember listening to Click and Clack, and they were like, it's always, cheaper to keep your old car than to buy a new car. Not anymore, dude. And one of those screens breaks on your 10-year-old Tesla. That's $2,500, and the car is probably not worth $2,500, if not more. I'm saying the screen.
The screen. Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I think that there's
because we live in this disposable. I'm pulling up my iPhone. Unfortunately, we live in a disposable society where the right to repair is just starting to kind of slowly kick in. But realistically, a 20-year-old vehicle, even something as simple as doing all 4 brakes, will probably cost you more than the value of the car.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd use brakes as an example because
doing all 4. And I'm not talking about just doing calipers. I'm talking about doing rotors, which at that point you're going to have to do as well.
I did it recently in my wife's car, and I spent a small fortune on it, and her car is a 2015. So we are talking about getting up there in years.
What?
That cost me $750
for the Mini to do rotors and pads.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. But that was with a lifetime thing from Brakes Plus. It was actually a lot cheaper than doing it at the dealership. Wanted about $1,000.
Of course.
Okay. So agreed with you on many of that, but the other bottom line is that there's an awful lot of vehicles out there that actually, are far cheaper to own and just keep putting a little bit of money in here and there, as opposed to trying to get the credit together, trying to make sure that you can actually afford a vehicle that costs you $200, $300, $400, $500 a month. It's the best car in my mind to ever own is the one that's paid off. That is just the bottom line for me.
All right, I'll give you another example.
Okay.
All right, we just bought that Mercedes GL.
Yes, you did.
Right, we paid $8,000 for it.
Yes, you did.
And we just put $2,000 into it.
Yes, you did.
Yes, $2,000 because what happened was when it got really cold, it refused to start. Mm-hmm. So we took it to Toby, and he said, "You blew your fuse." And I'm like, "Woohoo! We'll just replace the fuse." And he went, not so quickly, my man. Mm-hmm. The reason you blew your fuse is because that usually means that the starter is going. So guess how much a starter is on that car?
$1,500.
$1,500. Plus it has 2 batteries, which are also going. That was another $500. So we just spent $2,100 replacing a starter. And this is a problem with luxury cars more so than,
True. And what year is that?
2008.
Okay. Now, Roman, if I bought a 2008 Toyota Camry,
yes,
and its starter went out, it would cost me about $200 to replace the starter. Then this is not a reconditioned one; this is a new one, and probably another $100 to install it with having a professional mechanic put it in. Battery would probably cost me about $250 if I had to replace the battery for some reason over at Ace, or not Ace, one of the other advanced auto places or whatever. And thus, I would be spending far less money than you. It really depends on the car. It depends on the complexity of the car. And let's face it, your painful obsession with European vehicles is expensive. And if that was a Japanese car or even some Korean cars, it'd be far less expensive to maintain.
Okay, let me give you the counterpoint to that.
Yes, please.
So you buy an old Camry. Yes. And your starter goes out.
Yes.
And, when you have somebody like Toby or Devin, who another mechanic that we've used over the last 15 years and we trust, yes, $200. You take it to your local Joe's Corner repair shop, he's going to charge you $1,000 because the hammer Schlechter is misaligned.
Okay, but that's a totally different topic.
But that's what's going to happen.
Well,
because he sees you coming or she sees you coming a mile away, right? You've got this shitty car that
pardon his language.
You got this crappy car that you need repairing. They see you coming a mile away, and they will try to
exactly. Believe me, I get that. But the other side of it is, if you are informed, if you do your due diligence, you're able to walk in there and they say $1,000 for the Canuter valve. and another $800 for your coil for your exhaust or whatever. And you're like, oh, these things don't exist. Bye-bye. And you give them a really bad Reddit thing or whatever, and you move on to the next one. There are mechanics out there who are trustworthy. And one thing that I do recommend to people who are a little concerned about mechanics is A, look at their ratings online, and B, if all else fails, you can go into a dealership.
Dude, I've given up on ratings. Come on, that ratings. Once upon a time,
I know that
ratings,
some of them because the owner of the place is going to pay 9 people to give them a good rating. I get it.
They're a joke now. Come
But
on.
you can usually find, if you really do your due diligence, you can look around a little bit and you can talk to people, and you can find a good mechanic who is fair. They do exist, but keep in mind that you have to compare prices for these components and go to more than one mechanic, just like you would a doctor.
Can I give you another example?
Please.
So I was recently at a dealership where I walked in, and the first thing that struck me was that they had no Monronis on any of the cars. I think that's actually illegal. I think
That's strange.
I think that's illegal. I don't think you can have.
Was that here in Colorado?
I don't want to go into where it was.
Of course not. Okay, because they might have guys come after you.
I'm just saying there was a dealership that had no Monronis on their windows. So what you're saying is, that everybody is scrupulous. And the problem is, if you buy a $500 Camry, you already didn't do your due diligence, because if you did, you wouldn't buy a $500 Camry.
But maybe I would. We actually have a video that will be coming out in the very near future with our man Brendan going out and buying a $500 vehicle.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yes, and so stay tuned for that. That's going to be coming out.
Did you actually make it back from the auction?
I don't want to say. This is important. I am a firm believer in the potential of used cars as long as people have a little bit of mechanical acumen. But for those of you who don't, there are still plenty of good cars out there that have 100,000 miles on them. But you really do have to check around and talk to people. Hey, did you get a good deal from this mechanic? Yes or no.
But people don't do that.
Yes, they do.
Every so often we get an email, and this is us, right? Which, hundreds, if not thousands, of comments a week, where they'll email us and they'll ask us to suggest a good mechanic. But I think most people probably anyway. The reason I brought up the dealership was because you were saying like ratings.
Yes.
And then I went to the website, and the ratings were not good.
Well,
never mind.
Okay. Well, let's continue on to this list.
I've gotten myself into a swamp of contradictory logic.
Yeah, but that's nothing new.
That's nothing new. That's normal. All right, let's keep going.
He didn't take his Geritol today, guys.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Do people still take Geritol?
I don't know. You tell me.
What is Geritol?
It's a vitamin for brain and function or something.
I'm saying
like
people, it's like Prologen or something. Geritol. You are so dating yourself. You're making yourself older than me. I don't think people even know.
They still make this stuff. I know that.
I don't think even Tommy would know what Geritol is.
Of course.
Prevagen. I think that's like the next
Is it, Roman? You tell me.
There was an ad for it that I was watching, I think, in the Super Bowl.
Okay.
I think it was.
By the way, can I mention one ad that I absolutely love?
Yeah.
There was a Kawasaki ad for their side-by-side.
That was great, yeah.
Where the guys were growing mullets.
Yeah,
and I thought it was just, out of all those commercials, many of them I did not like. I got to be honest with you. I love Kia as a car company. Man, that commercial was so self-serving for rich people. But the Kawasaki commercial where they're growing mullets when they're just banging through the woods, awesome. I highly recommend checking it out.
I saw the Volkswagen one. They didn't actually show a new car except for the very end.
No, that was kind of interesting. It was kind of a love story of the Beetle and everything else and going through time. It was cute.
When did they stop selling the Beetle? Huh?
It's been a while. You tell me.
I get that they were going after the heritage, but
yeah, I know.
I kind of feel
why mention the Beetle if you're not going to bring out a new Beetle?
And then you know what they did at the end? They showed the ID Buzz and they said New York 2024.
Yeah, that's going to be
So but it was in LA like 2022.
It was in
Chicago
a year before that. Volkswagen has their heads in the wrong space when it comes to the ID Buzz. That should have been here 3 years ago. And but that's a whole different conversation.
I know. My free advice to Volkswagen, which they won't take, is just sell 2 cars: the ID Buzz and the Amarok, and you can
seriously forget about everything else.
You'll sell twice as many cars.
Well, the ID
and trucks.
7, is that it? The sedan.
Yeah,
that's
7.
coming soon. And our buddy Motoman actually got a chance to drive it, and so you'll have to stay tuned and hear about that. Let's go back to this list and finish this up. So we were at the 2016 Volkswagen. Speaking of Volkswagen, The Volkswagen Golf R.
We bought that car.
That was a great car, I thought.
What was that Mark? What Mark was that?
Was that 5? 4? It was with the 2-liter turbo. It replaced the VR6. It was this generation that replaced the VR6.
You know,
right?
the one to get is the Mark 7.5. That's the sweet spot.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the sweet spots in Volkswagen, or the R32. That's the other one.
See, the R32 is one of the, because it had a hunkin' V6.
Or the first one, but those are really hard to find.
I've heard people say that the R32 is actually really sturdy, like it's like strong, and you can, you know, some of these other ones are a little bit on the delicate side.
Once again, used and modified and hard to find.
Slammed,
hard to find any way or shape that is original.
Yeah, that we've seen our share of abused Volkswagen, both GTIs and Rs.
Well, because they become daily commuters because they've got such a high bandwidth for everything.
Yeah.
Right?
They really are the best vehicle that Volkswagen built. I just don't like the new one. I'm sorry. I can't stand it.
Well, it's better. They fixed some of the problems.
No,
but,
they made it ugly.
the look you don't like. They didn't fix that.
Aesthetics matter. I can't go to the prom with somebody who has a really good personality if I can't look at her face and not go a little bit in my mouth. I know, I'm one to talk. But come on, guys. You got to admit, the new Volkswagen Golf in general, that headlight design is dreadful. Looks sad, pouty. Okay, so let's move on to 2017. You got a chance to drive this vehicle, and I thought it was really interesting because it was a real bit departure for the company, and that is the Bentley Bentayga.
Yeah, we just had it for Christmas, remember?
We had the longer
wheelbase
newest
one,
yeah. But this was right when it came out, and they took you to the dunes.
Yeah, and it filled up with sand.
Yeah,
it was
drove
pretty
the crap
crazy.
out of it.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
I kind of like that one better than the new one.
I do too. Yeah, I think
I don't know what it is. Maybe the looks or what, but
the one I remember is the Bentley Continental R. Remember that one?
Oh, yeah, that was good. Actually, my favorite is the Mulsanne.
Oh, the Mulsanne.
Oh, yeah. I got lucky. A friend of mine let me drive one, and it was, they rarely, cars like that don't show up here in Colorado.
No.
California, yes. And that was where I drove it. And I absolutely fell in love with it because it was it was the best driving luxury car I'd ever driven. And it's not quite the same thing as the Continental, which is a showstopper, right? Or even the Bentayga really catches your eye. This one's a little bit more subtle, and what a great driving car. But anyway, but in terms of video, we have Roman driving in the dunes in the Bentley Bentayga in 2017.
That was crazy.
Yeah.
We took it on the track. I mean, I got to give Bentley a lot of props for letting us do something that nobody has ever done with the Bentayga since.
No, not since. Not that I know of.
Like jumping sand dunes and, whirling it around a racetrack.
Really
full
opening,
boil.
opening the taps on that thing.
That was pretty crazy.
Yeah, that was very cool, especially because we didn't have to pay the bill for whatever damage Roman did. I'm kidding a little. So next one is the 2018. This is a really important one. We were just talking about this earlier, the wide-body Charger and Challenger. And if you recall, we went to an event in Portland, Maine, where they had that track not too far away, that track in the hill. And we shot a video there, actually a couple videos where we were taking that the wide bodies on the track and talk about night and day. Very different types of experiences where they almost handled as opposed to not handling at all.
It's pretty funny just how much energy and money Dodge put behind kind of trying to prove that the muscle cars could actually go around a corner, which they could compared to like the 60s muscle cars, but certainly I think they probably would have been better just to lean into the drag strip as opposed to trying to go.
No, see, I disagree. I love the fact, and actually, if you look at their sales numbers, when the wide bodies came out, their sales numbers started going way up.
Yeah, but that's because they looked like that classic Coke bottle shape, and not because necessarily people felt that these were.
But they
good
were also
track cars.
able to do higher top speeds with those vehicles because they had more rubber on the road, and they changed the aerodynamic profile of them. So not the Challenger, but the Charger now had a 200 mile per hour top speed. I mean, think about it. You are buying a car for basically the same price as a BMW 7 Series, and you're able to do all these amazing things with it and take your family comfortably places. I thought it was incredible. And they went around the track quite well, but it wasn't as rewarding as driving, say, a Camaro or a Mustang of the same caliber around the track. Those were much better track cars. Let's face it, they were lighter and They were lighter on their toes and frankly had better feedback in terms of steering. But I really, really like the wide body cars. I thought that there was a huge departure and a really important vehicle for FCA at the time.
Well, I think it's hugely entertaining to take one of those on the track.
Yeah.
I don't think it's usually fast, but it certainly is hugely
You are
entertaining.
going to leave a lot of rubber around the places. Now, switching gears, let's talk about a vehicle that I think almost everybody at TFL, it's including Zach and it's including Tommy, absolutely adored. And that was the Ford Mustang GT Bullet.
Oh, yeah, that was fun.
Remember that green one?
Yeah, oh my God.
That thing was so great. And what was great about it wasn't the very top. There were still faster versions of the Mustang at the time, but a combination of everything, something that could go great on the track. You could drive every day. It had a nice interior because it was that limited Bullet livery and everything else. It was such a great car, and we all were jostling for the keys. What a great car. One of my favorite Mustangs of all time.
For me, Mustang does kind of the same thing that Porsche does. There's a little bit of FOMO, right? So it's like I can think of at least 5 lust-worthy Mustangs, and maybe it's too many. So yes, the Bullet is one of them. But then you're like, well, how about the California Special? Not the current one, but the previous one. How about the Boss 302? How about the GT350? How about the GT500? You see the problem. How about the Dark Horse? There's just so many different variations. And I mean, it's a great way to sell cars, but you kind of feel like I've got the Bullet, I've got the ultimate Mustang, and then they come and drop a GT350 and everybody freaks out about that.
But we even knew, even at the time, we knew that that wasn't the ultimate Mustang. But I mean, I talked to a lot of the Ford guys, and a lot of them loved that car as well, saying this is our favorite. Now, bear in mind, there was an earlier Bullet, much earlier.
Yeah, not the previous generation.
No. That was still on the Fox body. No, this is a totally different vehicle, and it basically had the same powertrain that our previous Mustang had and our new Mustang has, kind of a in between those 2 years, those 2 generations, I should say. Great car, wonderful car to handle and throw around a track. I just absolutely adored it. But what's interesting is that leads to an all-new revolution that you and Tommy got a chance to experience first, and that was in 2020, the Corvette, the all-new Corvette.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of thinking about that. I kind of really fell in love with the C7 because it was such a well engineered, I'm going to say almost GT car versus a sports car. Whereas definitely the C8 is an all-out sports car, right? You've got mid-engine designed. But as I get older, I kind of enjoy more the GT than I do the sports car. So my neighbor has a C8, beautiful car. But dude, getting in and out of that thing, just the statement it makes going down the road. I mean, maybe too much wing. That's like it's like having a GT3 911 on the road. Just too much wing. It kind of feels like you're trying to be a race car driver when you're probably not.
Well, it really is the American Ferrari.
It is.
It really, truly is.
You see, I think once upon a time, that was a cool look to have as much aero, as much
back in the 80s.
Fender, as much tire, think of the old 911s, as much rear whale tail. And now I think the pendulum has swung to the point where because a lot of like kids are buying these things, YouTubers, I guess, I don't know, whoever has a lot of money to spend when they're very young, and all of a sudden it feels very immature and it feels show-offy as opposed to fast. And it doesn't feel like a serious track tool. It just feels like a tool.
A couple things about this car. It really was a moonshot. It showed what General Motors can do, and it was at an unusual time because that was around the same time that they announced they're going to move to an all-electric future, which is right now up for debate. But regardless, at the time, this vehicle went from being a front engine, basically GT car, as Roman said, to a mid-engine / rear engine monster that really was closer to a Ferrari than the previous Corvette. Very different looking, no more manual transmission, which some people still bemoan, including me. And at the time, even the base model version of that was still an incredible bargain for performance. The amount of performance you got out of that thing was absolutely unreal, and its driving characteristics are on another level. It really is one of the best sports cars that General Motors has ever built, and there's all these different versions of them as well. Now we have technically an all-wheel drive one, which is a hybrid, and we're going to have an electric one coming, I believe, next year. So I mean, all these things are happening, But that vehicle really started a brand new direction for Corvette.
So two things there. First, like I said, for me, the sweet spot is probably the C7 Grand Sport.
Grand Sport's wonderful.
Yeah, so because it's got the wide wheelbase, it looks good, it's got enough power for me. And the second thing is, if you look behind us, there's a picture of me with the Bronco,
Yeah.
the first generation, first edition Bronco. And I just chose the Bronco. It could be any off-roader. And the reason I picked that for me is because, and this is why I'm kind of inserting it here, unlike the Corvette, off-roaders actually have usable performance that I can take to 10, which is a cliche, but I can actually use, right? I will never use, unless I go to the track, which I won't, all the performance of a C8 Corvette, no matter which one.
Yeah.
Forget the Z06, I mean, just even the base one. But with that Bronco, you can go off-road and you could lock the, triple lock it, and you can disconnect the sway bar, and you can actually use all of the technology and performance that is baked into that, or any off-roader. And that's why I love off-roading, because I can actually use the cool stuff that the car has, or truck, versus not use it and just feel like I'm driving around with all this capability that I will never be able to touch or feel or appreciate.
Which is indeed you. And that's...
It is me, yeah.
Yeah. But I know a lot of people who really do like to go on a little sojourn where they are flying down the highway, going to a track, doing their thing. I know these people personally, so do you. And there are plenty of people out there who want that sports car or the topless feel or a mixture of the two, or want a GT car, or want the best of all worlds, or as many worlds as they can possibly get. So I just find that the Corvette is a game changer for Chevrolet, and it was a really big videos, I should say, for us.
So Nathan, we know people, including people in this room, that have taken Corvettes above the speed limit, and maybe quite a bit above the speed limit on public roads.
Just a hair.
But whenever you do that, you're very nervous, because I'm nervous about not just, what can happen, but about, the legality of it. Whereas when I'm off-roading that, I feel completely fine, because I am using its full capability, and yet there's nothing that is illegal or dangerous.
Okay, now look.
Except Black Bear Pass. Okay,
and
that is hair racing.
And never mind the fact that when I had the TRX, I never went above the speed limit. When we drove the Raptors, I've never went.
These are all
above
hypotheticals.
Come on. All right, let's move on, because the next one is an off-roader, and that's the Chevrolet Tahoe Z71. And the reason I'm putting this in here, it's a little bit more of a truck than it is a car in terms of where it lands with us. Has a frame and whatnot. But it's a very unique vehicle for Chevrolet, because at the time, that was when they introduced the independent rear suspension, and this one had a very interesting locking rear diff. It wasn't your regular G80. We took it off-road. It did quite well. It was a bit of a departure for, once again, Chevrolet. And it blew our minds, because we didn't expect it to be quite as good as it was, and at the same time, it was just very unique. And many of the vehicles we do review on car are off-road vehicles, you may have noticed. And that is just one of the ones that I think really angled a new direction. Also, it was ridiculously expensive.
Yes. And you'll note this is not a comprehensive list of all the vehicles. I mean,
No.
this is one that Nathan put together. There are others that I like, the G-Wagon Squared. That's the one
Absolutely, G-Wagon should be on.
that comes to mind immediately.
Sure.
Yeah.
The G-Wagon was remarkable, and its predecessor was remarkable as well. But pardon me, the next one on the list, and this is an important one, because I never thought it would be on a list like this in terms of a favorite, but this is because it blew my mind, and I think you agree, is the 2023 Toyota Prius. I did not expect that car at all. I did not expect them to design a very good-looking vehicle, and it is absolutely sumptuous. Beautiful design. Drives nice. It's not fast. Even the Prime, it's quick. But for what they managed to do, I think it was one of the biggest surprises I personally had, at least, at TFL.
I think that's the most surprising car of the last 2 years.
Maybe I would agree.
5 years even.
Just because we didn't expect it.
Yeah, it just came out of the blue.
Yeah, it looked like a concept car, something that would never be built. And all of a sudden there it is, driving, and it's driving well. There are problems with it. For one thing, at least personally, I'm a big fat guy, and I don't fit in it very well, especially getting in it, because it's a sports car in terms of its raked windshield and really low entry height. The previous model, and we did a video where we actually put it against the previous model, is much more comfortable, especially in the back seat. So you do sacrifice a few things to have this really sleek body, but in return, it is more powerful and gets better mileage.
I think it's 50-50-50, or 52-52-52.
5250. Oh, mileage, yes.
So I think it's city 52, Highway 52 combined 52.
Yeah.
Incredible. Or 50-50-50. One of those. It's just incredible.
Yeah, it's just and it is the reason why whenever you want to talk about the argument between electrification, don't electric, whatever, that sits right in the middle. And that vehicle represents everything right with electrification. For those people who really want amazing mileage and rarely visit the gas pump, that's your car. It's so well done. So it's just worth it being on the list.
Did you skip the Chevy Tahoe or did
No, I totally skipped the Jeep Grand Cherokee. I don't know why I did that. So
let's talk about the Grand Cherokee. I thought you skipped the Tahoe.
No, I mentioned the Tahoe.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. The Jeep Grand Cherokee I did not mention.
Okay, maybe it was the other
The
one.
Jeep Grand Cherokee was another one of those things that totally blew us. But no, we do a lot of Jeeps. That's why I put it on here. Sure, there's plenty of Wranglers. I was going to mention the Wrangler. The previous generation was the JK. Is that the one that we took to?
Yep, JK jail.
So the JK, we did a thing called Motor Mountain USA where we drove to all 50 states, the highest point in all 50 states, yes, even Hawaii and Alaska. And that was hard. We did that years ago, I think back in 2014. And we did that, in that Jeep. And many of the states we towed a small trailer, which was a mistake.
Yeah, not a good tow rig.
No, not a great tow rig. But it was the first time we attempted to do something that extreme.
Can I suggest if you are thinking about getting a Jeep Wrangler and thinking about towing with it, even though they upped the towing rating to 5,000, it's just the vehicle, with that soft suspension, it's just not designed to tow.
If it's rated at 3,500 pounds, don't go above 1,000. That's my recommendation.
You can go 500, 1,500 maybe, 500 more.
It's just the springs. Nothing about that vehicle. If you really want to tow and you want a Jeep product, the Gladiator is the way to go.
Yeah,
that's it.
That's it. That's your answer.
Yeah, that it really is.
All right, and what's the last one on there?
The last one on this list is 2024 Lexus GX 550. What an amazing vehicle.
Another complete surprise.
Complete surprise. Basically, everything we wanted early on with the previous Land Cruiser and didn't get, this is it. It's just so good. And then of course there's Land Cruiser as well. But I wanted to mention this one because we actually have some time with this.
Yeah, and Toyota's done 3 about faces. So
seriously,
the Lexus GX, which was more of a kind of a luxury suburban kid getter, now is, especially with the Overtrail, has become a complete off-roader.
Yep.
Of course, the Land Cruiser, which has basically been cut in half in terms of price. It's gone from about $100K to $55K, and the Prius. So before we finish this up, Nathan, I want to run something by you, and I want to get your take on this.
Absolutely.
We're kind of living in this moment where there's a lot of pushback against electric vehicles.
Yes, I've seen it.
So a lot of people are out there saying, we went too far too fast. And so the sweet spot, and this is the common thinking, is that we should be all driving hybrids. It's like a baby step toward electrification.
I would agree. Plug-in hybrids right about now.
Or plug-in hybrids.
Yep.
And yet, there's also this kind of trend right now toward reliability. So people really want reliable cars. And I think that's because cars have become so expensive that if you're going to spend, the average new car prices come down a little bit, but it's still in the $45,000 range.
Yeah.
You want something that's quality.
Sure.
Right? So you want something that's going to last. And then the reality of those two trends kind of colliding is kind of in Consumer Reports testing is that the most unreliable cars in terms of longevity, in terms of cost of ownership, are hybrids. And if you want to go even worse than that, it's a plug-in hybrid because the complexity just, exponentially increases when you have 2 powertrains, or at least doubles. And then when you have a plug-in one, it increases even more.
Yeah.
So it's funny, it's kind of ironic that like the simplest car in some ways are electric cars because there's so few moving parts. And, if the only thing that's going to go wrong with it is a battery, and yet Tesla batteries have been around for 15 years and they do just fine.
For the most part.
And yet now people think that the best and the most reasonable purchases are either hybrids or plug-in hybrids, even though they're in at least Consumer Reports testing by far the most cost prohibitive in terms of long-term ownership.
But you have to check on some of the maintenance that they're talking about because in many cases it's not the drivetrain. The drivetrain on the Toyota Prius has been labeled as one of the more reliable drivetrains out there. Keep in mind that there's something that you guys may not know, which is the amount of energy that the gas engine is putting out is being assisted by the electric motor. Electric motors tend to be really reliable, and they usually are pretty long-lasting. And if you are using the electric motor to supplement the amount of power that's being put out with the gas engine, you are actually making that engine stress less. As such, you can get greater reliability. There are plenty of hybrids out there that are Priuses for the most part, or Prii, that are well past 250,000 miles. We've done videos on one that was over 300,000 miles. Yes, the batteries are problematic because after a certain amount of time, they will hold less charge, especially in plug-in hybrids.
Because they use lead. Well, Toyota uses lead acids for most of their hybrids, which should be less problematic because they've been around
nickel metal
forever.
hydride was what Toyota's really stood behind for many, many, many years, and they still do. Actually, they still love that battery because it is a very strong battery, and they have very few problems with them. But regardless of all that, I will say this: that I don't agree with Consumer Reports and their perspective because you're not looking at the whole picture. If a vehicle is mechanically reliable, that is a huge thing, and they don't mention that right away. There are electronic bugs that these vehicles have nothing to do with their mechanical systems in some cases.
Consumer Reports, the way they get their data is they
pull it.
They survey their members,
Yeah.
right? And they ask them, what car did you buy? Did you have issues with it? So I'm sure it's broken down more granularly than the way I'm displaying it.
Sure.
But I mean, I think that they're relatively valid. And once again, now we're getting into this weird conspiracy world where, like, some people say Consumer Reports are just, paid for shills, and they say that about us, they say it about everybody. But but just logically, it would seem that, let's say that, yes, you're right. If you have an electric powertrain, you don't use the gasoline internal combustion engine as much. But there is that also very tricky combination of both where you go from one to the other. And I think you're seeing a lot of issues with, I'll give you an example, the Wrangler 4xEs. I'm at least anecdotally, I'm hearing a lot of problems that people are having because that is a very complicated system.
That is a very complex system. And also, let's face it, Stellantis/FCA has had some reliability issues in the past, we've heard. But I'm not. I don't even go on the preacher thing about whether one thing works better than the other because there's different systems that different people use. The PHEVs that you're seeing nowadays are different than ones that were built just a couple of years ago.
And let's talk about electric cars just for a second,
Okay.
even though it's not in vogue. So as you know, the new Macan came out, and I believe and the Taycan, both the electric version and the gas version, the Macan, and of course the new Taycan. That is all electric. And Porsche made this interesting statement. They said that the car can now recoup up to 30% of the energy that you put into it. So let's just, I think it's got a 111 kilowatt hour battery, but let's just say it's a 100 kilowatt hour battery because that's easy for this example. So if it can recoup with regenerative braking 30%, that basically, let's say it had 100 miles of range, which it doesn't, but let's say it did, that means you now have 130 miles of range. And yet, Formula E cars, if I remember right, I think they recoup anywhere from 60 to 80%, which is incredible. So imagine if you could take that same technology, because a Formula E car doesn't even have rear brakes. It has, I don't know if it even has front brakes. I think it just has two motors, and the front one is regen. So it uses it to brake the vehicle and to regenerate power, and the rear one is a drive unit. But imagine if you could take some of that technology and put it into a modern electric car.
Well, I think we're beginning to see that.
You could get to 50% more regenerative, power. So let's say you've got 300 miles of range. That's 450 miles of range.
Yep.
Because you're adding 50, times.
That is all theoretical, but it's all based on logic, which I totally get. Here's
No, it's not theoretical. It's real.
No, it's not real yet.
Yeah, it is real. Formula E cars.
Formula E is not a car that you drive daily. It is a completely different construct in terms of the amount of energy you have to put into it, when you put the energy into it, how much energy you're putting out of it.
But it's still going
and how
down a
much
street
weight.
and turning and braking, just
Yeah,
like you would
of course
in a
it
regular
would.
car.
But that vehicle, it's a completely different thing. But that technology does trickle down. We proved it before. We've seen it
happens
before.
in Formula One.
All forms of racing really do show.
All I'm saying, Nathan, is like with internal combustion, we've seen a much greater explosion of fuel economy now that we've got turbos and but that number is still nothing compared to what you could potentially get with regenerative optimization.
Oh, sure,
where
among other things.
Where you're increasing range by 50%.
Sure.
Which means you're cutting energy use by 50%. That's unheard of.
In addition, solar cells are becoming more and more capable of storing more energy in a more efficient manner.
Wouldn't that be cool if you could actually power a car with solar cells?
You're starting to see that a little bit with some of the components on vehicles, and it will grow. We're still crawling with electrification. I'm not against it. I'm not for it. I'm right in the middle.
So you're a hybrid guy.
Well, no, I'm not even that, frankly. I like, let me put it to you this way. I was just in Los Angeles. I had the Genesis GV70 EV. Might be one of the finest EVs I've ever driven.
I love that vehicle. Me and Alex just
Absolutely
reviewed.
adorable.
Yeah, car.
But this is the their SUV version and everything else, and everything
we
about
had-
it's
we had a
great.
sedan.
Its range isn't great, but otherwise, I mean, it's like 230 miles,
Yeah.
but otherwise fantastic. And I'm driving it around California. California is like pushing. They got a gun to your head. You have to go electric. They're pushing it, and I get it. They're trying to be clean. All right, fine, whatever. Great car, driving around, everything's cool. It can do 350 kilowatts charging.
Yeah, those chargers don't exist.
They don't exist, exactly. Thank you very much. I drove all over California. I was losing my mind. There may be a video that we'll see later on. I went to one 350 charger plugged in. I was at 95 kilowatts. I just sit there just waiting and waiting half an hour to get up to 80%. There are other places where I could get up to 150, even though it was advertised 350. The thing is that the automakers have gone and bent over backwards to give you a car that can charge super fast, potentially.
Well, did you condition your batteries, Nathan? Did the car condition?
I did everything I could to make sure that it was doing it right. The point is that we still are not at a place where you're able to go into one of these places, plug in like a regular gas station, and be out of there in 10 minutes. Doesn't exist. Not for your regular consumer. It's not the car companies that are doing this. This is actually the infrastructure, which I still think is screwed. So I think that there's a car for anybody right now. And this is the good news. If you live in California and you don't need to drive long distance, then having an electric car makes total sense because you can plug into your house. If you have a house, and you can use that as a gas station. Great. If you do need to go long distance occasionally, you get a plug-in hybrid or a hybrid. You're good. And for those of you who still need a burly truck or something that has just real power and can go long distance, you can still get diesels and you can still get, V8s and whatever you want to get. I think this is sort of a golden time right now where we're on the edge of having to go into regulation, but also that's being pushed back a little bit too, which I'm kind of happy to see because I hate it when somebody's telling me you can only have one powertrain. So having a choice, I think, is great. And I think that automakers are going to try to make their vehicles even more efficient so they can still provide choice to the consumers.
All right, guys. Well,
There it is.
thank you for joining us. And once again, if you're all grumpy because there's not enough moving pictures, in other words, not enough video of cars in this podcast, keep in mind this is TFL Talk.
Yeah.
And we put out about 15 to 20 videos a week. So if you go to All TFL, there's plenty of videos with us off-roading cars, driving cars,
Motorcycles too.
motorcycles, electric bikes.
Yeah.
Just not here. This is kind of our podcast. So
That's exactly what
so
we
please
are here.
don't be grumpy because you've stumbled upon TFL Talk and you want us to be actually in the field. We're in the field a lot. Anyway, guys, thank you for joining us. Nathan, thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure.
And as always, like I say, go to alltfl.com if you want to see TikToks and
All that
ticks,
stuff.
Talk ticks and all that stuff.
All right. Take care, guys. We'll see you next time.
Ciao.